My name is Captain Alina Winters, 32 years old, United States Army. I am responsible for the lives of soldiers, but 24 years ago, I was just an 8-year-old girl watching my family fall apart. In their divorce, my father chose my brother. My mother chose my sister, and no one chose me. After 2 decades of silence, they all want back into my life, expecting to find the same desperate, abandoned child. But that little girl is gone. In her place, they will face a captain trained never to back down. If you've ever had to be your own rescuer, this story is for you. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Please support me by liking this video and subscribe if this story of overcoming abandonment resonates with you, because believe me, this journey gets rough. The silence in my Fayetteville apartment was a fortress. It was a sterile, disciplined quiet that I had earned. Outside, the North Carolina humidity hung thick in the air, but inside, the air conditioning hummed a steady, predictable rhythm. I had just finished a grueling day of field exercises at Fort Liberty, and my muscles screamed with a satisfying ache. My body was exhausted, but my mind was sharp. This was my sanctuary, a space defined by order, a space where no one could hurt me. Then my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, a sudden intrusion that sliced through the peace. I let it sit for a moment, my heart rate kicking up a notch. I didn't get many personal texts. My life was my work. I walked over, wiping a bead of sweat from my brow, and picked it up. The message was from an unknown number, but below it a name appeared that felt like a ghost, clawing its way out of a shallow grave. Noah Winters. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't seen that name in 24 years. Not on a letter, not on a birthday card, not once. My thumb hovered over the screen, a tremor running through my hand that I couldn't control. With the deliberate calm of disarming a bomb, I opened it. The words were stark against the bright screen. Elena, it's me. Dad has a serious heart condition. The whole family is gathering in Chicago this weekend. He wants to see you. I read it again, and a third time. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. No apology for 2 decades of silence. No, how are you? No acknowledgement of the chasm of pain that separated us. It was a command, disguised in the cheap costume of family obligation. A cold, hard fury began to build in my gut. An anger so pure and chilling it felt like ice water flooding my veins. They hadn't looked for me when I was a nameless file in the foster care system. They only looked for me now, when they needed a prop to fill a role in their family drama. My first instinct wasn't to cry. That reflex had been trained out of me long ago. My first instinct was analysis, threat assessment. Who gave him my number? The list of people who had it was short and vetted. What was the real objective? The message said he was sick, but with them, there was always a hidden agenda. My training kicked in, overriding the emotional storm. I began to pace the length of my living room, the heels of my boots making sharp, rhythmic clicks on the hardwood floor. A habit for strategic thinking. This family, they weren't a source of comfort. To me, they were an unidentified entity with a high potential for collateral damage. I saw them not as parents or siblings, but as an opposing force with unknown capabilities and intentions. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began to search. I was collecting intelligence just as I would before a mission. I needed to understand the enemy. I found them easily. My father, Jack, looking frail in recent photos from a fishing trip. My mother, Diane, smiling at a charity luncheon. Sophie, my younger sister, with her husband and 2 kids in matching Christmas sweaters, and Noah, a successful real estate agent with a perfect family portrait pinned to his profile. They had built entire lives without me, and now they wanted to drop back into mine as if they had just stepped out for groceries. As I scrolled through their curated happiness, I remembered something an army chaplain once told me. I'm not a religious woman, but his words had stuck. Be still and know that I am God. He said it wasn't about prayer. It was about finding the calm center in the hurricane. It was about observing, orienting, deciding, and then acting. So I stilled my shaking hands. I observed the data, and I decided to do nothing. A few hours later, just as I was about to force down a protein bar for dinner, the phone rang. This time, the screen lit up with Sophie's name. A small, forgotten part of me wanted to answer. The captain in me knew it was the second wave of the attack. I let it ring 3 times before answering, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a word. "Elena, are you there?" Sophie's voice was thin and trembling, laced with manufactured tears. "Please. I know this is a lot, but Dad is really weak. He's been asking for you. He keeps saying your name." The words were meant to break me, but all I heard was a selfish plea. He's saying my name now, I thought, the question a shard of ice in my mind. In 24 years of birthdays I spent alone, of Christmases in group homes, did my name ever once leave his lips? Or does it only surface now that he's staring at his own mortality and needs my forgiveness to find peace? I ended the call without a single word. The silence that followed was suffocating. The walls of my fortress felt like they were closing in. I grabbed my truck keys and drove. I didn't know where I was going until I found myself pulling up in front of Sergeant Miller's house. Sarge was my mentor, the closest thing I'd ever had to a father. He was on his front porch in a worn rocking chair, a bottle of Budweiser sweating in his hand. He saw my truck and gave a slow, knowing nod. I sat on the porch steps as he listened, not saying a word, just taking in my report. I laid out the facts: the text, the call, the silence. When I was finished, he took a long pull from his beer. "Captain," he said, his voice a low rumble, "they may share your blood, but they don't have a claim on your loyalty. Loyalty is earned. It's earned over years, in the trenches, shoulder to shoulder. You don't owe them an answer. You don't owe them your presence. The only decision that matters is the one that brings peace to the soldier inside you." His words settled me. He was right. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about protecting my own hard-won peace. But as I drove home, another question began to burn through the calm. It wasn't about what I should do. It was about them. Why did they think they had the right? To understand that audacity, I had to remember the house before it became hell. Before the silence, there was sound. My childhood memories aren't stored in clear, linear thoughts, but in sensations. They smell like a summer rain shower hitting the hot pavement in our Naperville subdivision, a sizzle that sent steam rising from the asphalt. They taste like grape popsicles, the kind that stained your tongue purple for hours. Before my world fractured, it was whole, and it was perfect. Our house on Elm Street was the center of the universe. The living room floor was our kingdom, where the 5 of us would sprawl out for epic games of Uno, the slap of cards hitting the polished wood echoing through the house. My mother's laugh was the best sound in the world, a bright ringing bell that could make anything okay. My father, Jack, was my hero. He was a builder, a man whose hands could turn a pile of lumber into a home. He taught me the difference between oak and pine just by its scent, how to drive a nail straight and true with 2 clean hits. "You've got the eye of an architect, Elena," he'd say, ruffling my hair. Those words made me feel like I could build worlds. Noah, my older brother, was my protector. On the playground, his shadow was my shield. No one dared to bother me when he was around. And my little sister, Sophie, was my echo. A tiny shadow who wanted to do everything I did, from tying her shoes to the way she held her fork. We were the 5 points of a perfect star, a complete and unbreakable constellation. The brightest point in that constellation was my 7th birthday. It was a warm June afternoon, and Dad gathered us in the backyard under the sprawling branches of the old oak tree. He brought out a metal box, the kind you might keep important papers in, and set it on the grass. "This," he announced with a grand voice, "is the Winters family time capsule." The rules were simple. Each of us had to place our most important possession inside. We would bury it, and we wouldn't open it for 20 years. My dad went first. He dropped in his trusty old tape measure, the metal casing worn smooth from years of use. My mother, Diane, gently placed a small framed photo from their wedding day inside. Noah, a die-hard Chicago Cubs fan, contributed his most prized possession, a baseball signed by the great Ryan Sandberg. Sophie tearfully parted with her favorite doll, its yarn hair matted from love. When it was my turn, I hesitated. What was the most important thing to me? After a long moment, I ran inside and came back with a crayon drawing I had made. It was a simple, childish sketch of 5 stick figures holding hands under a big, smiling sun. I carefully folded it and placed it on top of the other treasures. It was the only thing I could think of that included all of us. Together, we dug a hole at the base of the mighty oak. As Dad shoveled the last bit of dirt over the box, he put his hand on my shoulder. "We will always be here to dig this up together," he promised. Always. I believed him. In that moment, under that tree, always felt as solid and real as the ground beneath my feet. But always is a fragile thing. The cracks started to appear not long after, so small at first you could barely see them. They started as whispers. I'd be in my bed on the edge of sleep, and I'd hear their voices from downstairs, not the easy, laughing tones I was used to, but tight, strained whispers that sounded like pulled wires. Then I started finding my mother in the laundry room, her back to me, her shoulders shaking in silent sobs. She'd always wipe her eyes and force a smile, but the sadness lingered in the air like the cloying scent of fabric softener. My father started coming home later. The familiar smell of sawdust on his clothes was replaced by the sour smell of beer, and something else I couldn't name then, but know now was the scent of failure. Our family dinners, once loud and chaotic, grew quiet. The laughter faded, replaced by the heavy sound of my father's sighs. I didn't understand what was happening, only that a cold draft was seeping into our warm house, the kind that comes from a door left open to a storm. One Saturday, I tagged along with my dad to one of his construction sites. He was arguing with a man in a crisp suit, his voice louder and angrier than I had ever heard it. The man in the suit kept pointing at a blueprint and shaking his head. My father, his face red with frustration, finally turned and slammed his fist against the side of his pickup truck with a helpless rage that scared me. That was the first night I saw him truly drunk. He sat in his favorite armchair in the living room, the TV screen dark and blank, reflecting his empty stare. "It's all gone," he muttered to the empty screen. "It's all over." My mother tried to help him upstairs, her voice soft and pleading, but he brushed her hand away. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, hidden in the shadows, my small heart clenched into a tight fist. I didn't know if I was watching the collapse of a building contract or the collapse of my entire world. I only knew that the foundation of our perfect house was cracking, and I was terrified of what would happen when it finally gave way. What do they do with the children nobody wants? They put them in the system, and the system puts you in a black trash bag. That's what home became for me. Not a place, but an object. A heavy-duty trash bag where I kept my 3 changes of clothes and a worn-out teddy bear named Howard. The word itself lost all meaning. My first placement was with the Thompsons. They didn't have a spare room, so I slept on a lumpy sofa in the living room, a place that was never dark and never quiet. The television droned on all night, its flickering blue light my only moon. I learned to sleep with my eyes closed, but my ears open. I learned to eat fast, because if you didn't, the other kids would take what was on your plate. In those first few months, a naive hope still flickered inside me. I wrote letters to Noah and Sophie at our old address in Naperville. I poured my heart out in childish handwriting, telling them I was okay and asking when I could come home. I never got a reply. I didn't know then that the letters were all being returned to the social services office, stamped with the cold red words, "Not at this address." My second home was with the Williams family. It was there I learned that words could cut deeper than any fist. Mrs. Williams was a woman whose bitterness had curdled her soul. She seemed to find a reason to hate me in everything I did. "You eat like a pig," she'd snap at the dinner table if I finished my food too quickly. "You're lazy," she'd say if I sat down to read a book. I learned to make myself small, to become invisible. But the worst came when she was cleaning my room and found the small stack of letters I'd hidden under my mattress. She pulled one out, a letter I'd just written to Sophie, filled with questions about her new school and please not to forget me. In front of her own children at the dinner table, she read it aloud, her voice dripping with mockery. Then she ripped it into tiny pieces and dropped them into the trash. "Don't bother her new family," she said, her eyes cold and hard. "You're just the past." Then came the line that would echo in my head for years. "No wonder your parents didn't want you." That night, something inside me broke. I went to my corner of the room, picked up my teddy bear, Howard, and methodically tore his seams open. I pulled out every last piece of cotton stuffing until he was just a limp, empty shell. If love and memory could be destroyed so easily, it was better to have nothing left to love. By the time I was 14, I was sent to the Jacksons. They were in it for the money, collecting state checks for the kids they housed. Food was a currency they withheld. My meals often consisted of a single slice of white bread and a glass of water. A gnawing hunger became my constant companion. Punishment for the smallest infraction, leaving a sock on the floor, not finishing a chore fast enough, was being locked in the basement closet. It was damp, dark, and smelled of mildew. But in that darkness, something shifted. The fear I was supposed to feel was replaced by a cold, quiet rage. I was a survivor. I had survived my family's abandonment. I had survived the Williamses' cruelty, and I would not let these people starve me to death. One night, after being locked in the closet for hours, I found a loose nail on a shelf. I used it to pry open the weak wood around the window of the basement door. I climbed out, ran, and didn't look back. For 3 days, I lived in a local park, sleeping under a bridge and eating leftover scraps from trash cans. I felt more free, more human in those 3 days than I ever did in that house. When the police eventually found me, I wasn't sent back. I was taken to see a school counselor, a woman named Ms. Rivera. I walked into her office expecting another lecture, another pitying look. Instead, she looked at me the way a senior officer looks at a battle-hardened soldier. "You have survived things most adults couldn't, Alina," she said, her voice calm and direct. There was no pity in it, only respect. "You are smart. You are resilient. Don't let this system define you. Use it. Learn everything you can." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "Your grades will be your weapon. Your knowledge will be your armor." It was the first time anyone had seen past the broken foster kid. She wasn't telling me what I was. She was asking me what I wanted to become. That conversation planted a seed. In the school library, I found a book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. I was too young to grasp all the philosophy, but one idea hit me like a lightning bolt. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing. The last of the human freedoms. To choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. To choose one's own way. They had taken my family, my home, and my childhood. But they couldn't take my mind. They couldn't take my will. That was the moment the survivor became a fighter. If you've ever had a moment like that, a turning point where you decided you would not be a victim, please support this story by hitting the like button. And in the comments, just write the words, "I am a fighter." Let's see how many of us are out there. From that day on, I fought. I fought for every A on every test. I fought for a quiet corner in the library. I fought for my own mind, my own future, building a fortress inside myself where no one could ever hurt me again. Ms. Rivera had given me my armor and my weapon. On my 18th birthday, I aged out of the foster care system with a high school diploma with honors, a worn canvas duffel bag, and a check for $752. I walked out of the social services building for the last time and headed straight for the one place that promised a future built on merit, not on pity. The United States Army Recruiting Office. My decision wasn't born from blind patriotism. It was a calculated, strategic choice. The Army promised 3 meals a day, a roof over my head, and a purpose. For a girl who had none of those things, it was the best deal on the table. Basic training was a controlled hell designed to break you down and rebuild you. But for me, it felt like heaven. The punishing physical exertion, the drill sergeant's roaring voices just inches from my face, the bone-deep exhaustion at the end of each day. It was all a welcome relief from the unpredictable chaos and gnawing uncertainty I had known my entire life. Here, the rules were clear. The expectations were laid out. For the first time, I knew exactly what I had to do to succeed. For the first time, I felt like I belonged to something. The uniform was more than just clothing. It was a skin I had earned, a symbol that I was part of a unit, a team, a family. I was never the fastest runner or the best marksman, but in the structured world of the military, my true talent emerged. The same hypervigilance that had helped me survive abusive homes made me extraordinarily adept at logistics and strategy. I could see patterns in chaos. I could look at a tangled mess of troop movements, supply chains, and mission deadlines and untangle it into a clean, efficient plan of action. I saw the whole chessboard. It was Master Sergeant Miller who first noticed it. "You don't think like a soldier, Winters," he told me one day after I had reorganized our entire battalion's deployment schedule in under an hour. "You think like a general." Coming from Sarge, a man who had forgotten more about the Army than I would ever know, it was the highest praise. It was recognition based purely on competence, not charity. It was like water on scorched earth, and under his mentorship, I began to grow. Years passed. I went to officer candidate school. I earned my commission. And with the help of a VA loan, I did something the 8-year-old girl in the trash bag could never have imagined. I bought my own house. It was a small, unassuming ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood in Fayetteville. Nothing fancy. The day I got the keys, I walked into the empty space. The smell of fresh paint hung in the air, a scent of new beginnings. I owned no furniture, not even a chair. I didn't care. I walked to the center of the living room, dropped my duffel bag, and lay down flat on the cool, solid hardwood floor. I pressed my cheek against the wood, feeling its unyielding strength beneath me. This was mine. No one could take it from me. No one could kick me out. I had built this. With my own 2 hands, I had forged the safety I'd craved my entire life. That house slowly filled, not just with furniture, but with people. My new family. This family wasn't bound by blood, but by shared hardship and unwavering loyalty. There was Zoe, a quick-witted combat medic from my unit whose sarcastic humor could make me laugh on the worst days. And there was Sarge and his wife Carol, who unofficially adopted every soldier who didn't have a place to go for the holidays. I'll never forget my first Thanksgiving with them. I had planned to spend the day alone in the barracks, cleaning my rifle. It felt safer that way. But Sarge showed up at my door, his orders firm. "You're not spending Thanksgiving alone, Lieutenant. Get your coat." At their home, the air was warm with the smell of roasting turkey and apple pie. Carol Miller wrapped me in a hug that felt more real than any I'd ever received. She held me for a long moment and whispered in my ear, "There are no strangers here, honey. Just sons and daughters we haven't met yet." And for the first time in over a decade, I cried. They weren't tears of sadness or self-pity. They were tears of relief. The profound, soul-shaking relief of being welcomed, of being seen. They never asked about my past. They didn't need to. They accepted me for the soldier I was, for the woman I had become. They were the ones who showed up. They were the ones who stayed. Surrounded by the easy laughter and genuine affection in the Millers' crowded home, a fundamental truth finally clicked into place for me. I recalled reading about Audie Murphy, the most decorated soldier of World War II, a man who came from a broken, impoverished family but found his honor and purpose in the service. His past didn't define his future. And as I sat there, a plate of food piled high in my lap, I understood. Family isn't about the people you're born to. It's not about shared blood. It's about shared battles. It's the people you choose and who choose you back to stand with in the trenches. The peace I had found with my chosen family felt solid, permanent. It was a foundation I had laid myself, brick by painful brick. For several days after receiving the initial texts, I let the silence hold. But the soldier in me knew that an unaddressed threat is a lingering one. So, on a quiet Tuesday night, I decided to return fire. I called Noah. The line connected, and the silence that stretched between Fayetteville and Chicago was thick with 24 years of things left unsaid. "Alina?" Noah's voice was hesitant, unfamiliar. "This is she. I replied, my tone flat, professional. The voice of a captain, not a sister. He tried to fill the dead air with awkward small talk, asking about my job in the army, pretending to be a normal brother catching up with a long-lost sibling. I gave him nothing but short, clipped answers. It's fine. Yes. No. I was forcing him to get to the point, to state his objective. Finally, he cracked. Look, Elena, I'm sorry, he stammered. I know I should have found you sooner. We all should have. But Mom and Dad... He trailed off, searching for the right words to excuse the inexcusable. They said it was for the best. For you to have a completely fresh start without all the... mess. The excuse was so weak, so transparent, it made me feel sick. For my best, I thought, a bitter taste in my mouth, or for the best of their guilty consciences. A fresh start wasn't a gift they gave me, it was a sentence they imposed. He finished the call by reminding me again how sick Dad was, how they all really, really hoped I would come. I hung up without making any promises. A few days later, my mother called. Diane. Her voice was a syrupy performance of remorse, thick with crocodile tears. She launched into a monologue about sleepless nights spent worrying about me, about a box in her attic where she'd kept all my childhood drawings. I listened in silence, my heart a block of ice. I had spent a decade in the system listening to lies from adults. I could spot a performance a mile away. Then, after the stage was set with her supposed grief, she dropped the bomb. You're a captain now, she said, her voice shifting subtly from sorrowful to calculating. You must be so stable, and that's wonderful. Your sister, Sophie. She's struggling, Alina. Her husband just lost his job, and with the kids. Could you possibly... She didn't get to finish the sentence. A cold, clean line was crossed. A switch flipped inside me. No, I said. The word was a blade, sharp and final. I can't. I hung up the phone before she could respond. A wave of disgust washed over me. They didn't see me. They didn't see the woman I'd become, the soldier I'd fought to be. They saw a solution to a problem. They saw an ATM in a uniform. Sophie was the most difficult. She was the final wave of the psychological assault, the one aimed at the weakest point in my defenses. She didn't demand, she pleaded. She texted me old photos from a disposable camera, the two of us with missing front teeth, grinning on a swing set. She sent long, rambling messages about how much she missed her big sister. I know Mom was wrong to ask you for money, one text read. She doesn't get it. But please, can't you come for Dad? Just this once. For me. I need you, Alina. Her vulnerability, whether real or feigned, pricked at a tiny buried corner of my heart where the 8-year-old girl still lived. A part of me felt a primal urge to protect the little sister I once adored. I was torn. But the soldier, the part of me that had kept me alive, recognized the tactic. It was an emotional minefield, designed to pull me in and tear me apart. During a training exercise on psychological warfare, an instructor had told us, your enemy will always attack your weakest point. Do not let your sentiment be a vulnerability they can exploit. These calls, these texts, they were an attack. And I needed to reinforce my perimeter. That night, I went over to Zoe's apartment with a 6-pack of beer. As we sat on her small balcony, I laid out the situation, presenting the facts as if I were briefing a mission. The calls from Noah and Diane, the texts from Sophie. The pressure campaign. Zoe listened patiently, as she always did. When I was done, she didn't offer advice. She didn't tell me what I should or shouldn't do. She just looked at me and asked a simple, clarifying question. Alina, do they bring peace to your life, or do they bring chaos? The question cut through all the noise. It was a targeting laser painting the objective. For my entire adult life, I had fought to escape the chaos they had created. I had built a life of order, discipline, and peace. I could not, would not allow them to drag me back into the storm. My mission was clear: protect the peace at all costs. I went home with a renewed sense of clarity. My hands were steady as I typed out a single group message to Noah and Sophie. I kept it short, concise, and unambiguous. A directive. I will not be coming to Chicago. I will not be sending money. If you genuinely want to talk, you can come to me in Fayetteville. On my schedule and on my terms. I hit send. The message was delivered, the boundary had been drawn. The ball was now in their court. I had given my terms for engagement. Now I would wait and see if they respected them. For a week, my phone was silent. After sending my message, I'd interpreted the lack of response as a quiet victory, a sign that my terms had finally been understood. I was wrong. I had established a defensive line, and they had simply decided to go around it. The counterattack didn't come through my phone, it came through my chain of command. I was in the middle of a logistics briefing when my sergeant appeared at the door. Captain Winters, Colonel Evans wants to see you in his office, now. A cold knot formed in my stomach. A summons to the battalion commander's office wasn't a casual invitation. As I walked the short distance down the hallway, my mind raced through every possible scenario. Had I missed a deadline? Was there a problem with a supply shipment? Nothing made sense. I entered his office and stood at attention. Captain Winters reporting as ordered, sir. Colonel Evans was a man I respected deeply. He was tough, fair, and embodied the quiet professionalism of a career officer. But the look on his face wasn't one of a commander addressing a subordinate. It was one of deep annoyance. At ease, Captain, he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. His tone was clipped. I just had a very strange call from a man claiming to be your father. The air left my lungs. The knot in my stomach tightened into a fist of ice. This was it. The ultimate violation. Colonel Evans continued, his eyes fixed on me, gauging my reaction. He told me quite a story, said he was a dying old man, and that his only wish was to see his estranged, stubborn daughter one last time. He leaned forward slightly. I don't make it a habit to interfere in the personal lives of my soldiers, Captain, but when a civilian calls my office and implies one of my officers is neglecting her family duty, it affects the integrity of this unit. So I'll ask you once, what the hell is going on? The humiliation was instant and searing. It was followed by a white-hot surge of rage. My father hadn't just crossed the line, he had invaded my sanctuary. He had taken the private, messy wreckage of his own making and dragged it into the one place on earth where I had earned respect, where my name meant something. He was trying to use the very structure I had used to save myself as a cage to trap me. I met the colonel's gaze, my back ramrod straight. The turmoil inside me was a hurricane, but my voice, when it came out, was terrifyingly calm. Sir, I began, choosing my words with precision. The man who called you, along with my mother, abandoned me to the state of Illinois when I was 8 years old. I was raised in the foster care system. I have not seen or heard from either of them in 24 years. I paused, letting the weight of that statement settle in the quiet office. Now, he is using his illness and your rank to try and force my compliance to his wishes. He has attempted to leverage my career, sir, to get what he wants. The look on Colonel Evans's face shifted. The annoyance vanished, replaced first by surprise, then by a dawning understanding, and finally, by a deep and unmistakable respect. The entire dynamic in the room had changed. I was no longer an officer being questioned. I was a soldier who had just revealed the nature of her enemy. He stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor. Thank you for the clarification, Captain, he said, his voice now firm and supportive. You don't need to explain anything further. You do what you need to do. He walked around his desk and placed a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of pity, but of solidarity. And if he calls again, I'll handle it. That was all I needed. That validation, that unwavering support from my commander, was the final piece of armor. I walked out of his office a different person than the one who had walked in. The last shred of doubt, of emotional conflict, had been burned away. All that remained was a cold, hard resolve. They had escalated this from a family matter to a full-blown conflict. They had made a strategic error. They had brought the battle onto my territory. I drove straight home, my mind clear. I remembered a quote from General Patton I'd read long ago. Accept the challenges, so that you can feel the exhilaration of victory. This was no longer about hurt feelings. This was a challenge to everything I had built, and I would win. I didn't text. I didn't call. I opened my laptop and initiated a video call to Noah and Sophie. Their faces popped up on the screen, looking surprised and anxious. I didn't waste time with greetings. "Father called my commanding officer," I stated, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "He tried to use my career against me. The game is over. I'm coming to Chicago." I saw a flicker of relief cross their faces, the mistaken belief that their tactics had worked. I extinguished it immediately. "But not for a reunion," I continued, my voice hardening into steel. "I am coming to speak with you all one time, and one time only. You will arrange a meeting in a public place, neutral ground. Just my father, my mother, you two, and me. After that conversation is over, all of you will leave me alone, permanently." I leaned closer to the camera, ensuring they saw the absolute certainty in my eyes. "Is that clear?" They had finally pushed a soldier too far. If you've ever had to draw a final, unbreakable line in the sand with someone, show your support by hitting that like button. And in the comments below, just write the 2 words, "line drawn." The moment the video call ended, the mission began. I was no longer a daughter or a sister caught in a storm of emotion. I was an operational planner, and Chicago was my theater of war. My actions followed the principles of the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. I had observed their tactics, I'd oriented myself to the new reality, I had decided on a course of action. Now, it was time to prepare for that action. Before any soldier enters hostile territory, they gather intelligence. My first step was a phone call to the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. As a former foster child, I had the right to request a copy of my own case file. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and prepared to face the ghosts of my past, not as memories, but as documented facts. Reading that file was like watching a horror movie where I was the main character. Page after page of cold, bureaucratic language detailed the dismantling of a child's life. Reports of each new placement, social workers' notes on my adjustment issues, complaints from foster parents about my quiet defiance. It was a painful, dispassionate account of my survival. I wasn't reading it to reopen old wounds. I was gathering ammunition. I used a yellow highlighter to mark the key pieces of evidence. A medical report from my time with the Jacksons, noting malnutrition and significant weight loss. A social worker's entry about the letters I wrote that were returned to sender. And then I found it. The smoking gun. A log entry dated 6 months after I entered the system. It read, "Multiple attempts to contact parents, Jack and Diane Winters, for case review, have failed. Phone calls not returned." There it was, in black and white. It wasn't just a slow drifting apart, it was a deliberate disappearance. They hadn't just let me go, they had actively refused to be found. The pain was sharp and visceral, but it was validating. This was my proof. This was the truth. I carefully organized the highlighted pages, placed them in a crisp new folder, and on the tab, I wrote in black marker, Exhibit A, File 734B. My next step was to define my objectives and analyze the opposing forces. I couldn't confront all 4 of them as a single unit. Each was a separate target with a distinct psychological vulnerability. My father, Jack, was driven by late-stage guilt and a lifetime of weakness. My mother, Diane, was insulated by layers of denial and self-pity. Noah was compromised by a sense of responsibility he had failed to act on. And Sophie was ruled by emotion, easily swayed and desperate for harmony. My primary objective was not punishment, it was truth and containment. I needed to present my version of history, backed by indisputable facts, and force them to hear it. Then, I needed to establish a permanent, non-negotiable boundary. I had to make them understand that the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The helpless little girl they had left behind was gone, replaced by a woman who commanded soldiers. They no longer had any power over me. No soldier goes into a critical mission alone. I called Zoe. "I need backup," I said, my voice steady. "I want you to come with me to Chicago. There wasn't a moment's hesitation in her voice. Already putting in my leave request. When do we fly? With my support elements secured, I laid out the rules of engagement for the meeting. 1. Neutral ground. A public restaurant of my choosing, not a private home where they controlled the environment. 2. A time limit. 90 minutes, maximum. Enough time to state my case, not enough for a drawn-out emotional drama. 3. A code of conduct. No shouting, no theatrics, no fake tears. If anyone violated the protocol, Zoe and I would stand up and walk out. The mission would be terminated. Finally, I prepared my briefing. On a small 3x5 index card, I wrote down my key talking points, just as I would before addressing my troops. I would not allow myself to be derailed by emotion. I would stick to the facts. I would execute the plan. A few days before the flight, I did one last thing to prepare my own morale. I drove to the small, quiet cemetery on the outskirts of town and stood before the simple gravestone of Harriet Shaw. She was the only foster mother who had ever shown me genuine kindness. I'd only been with her for a year before she passed away, but it was the most peaceful year of my childhood. I placed a small bouquet of daisies on the grass in front of her name. "I'm about to do something hard, Harriet," I whispered to the cool stone. "I'm going to speak for the little girl who never had a voice." I remembered something she used to tell me, her voice always gentle but firm. "Kindness doesn't mean weakness, Alina," she'd said. "Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to say no." As I walked back to my truck, a profound sense of calm settled over me. I wasn't going into this battle alone. I wasn't just fueled by anger and resolve. I was carrying the strength of everyone who had ever truly cared for me: Sarge, Zoe, the memory of Harriet. They were my true family, and I would not let them down. The Italian restaurant they chose was in the heart of the Chicago Loop, a place buzzing with the noise and anonymity of 1,000 lives intersecting for a brief moment. It was the perfect battlefield. Zoe and I arrived 15 minutes early. My training dictated my actions. I chose a booth in the back corner, positioning myself with my back to the wall and a clear, unobstructed view of the entrance and the entire room. A soldier's habit. I ordered a glass of ice water, the condensation tracing lines down the side, and waited. My mind was calm, my heart rate steady. The index card with my talking points rested in my jacket pocket, a tangible piece of my preparation. They arrived together, but not as a unit. They were a chaotic cluster of anxiety, each wrapped in their own cloud of unease. My father, Jack, looked older and more frail than his pictures suggested, a man physically diminished by time and illness. Yet, the familiar air of patriarchal authority, the expectation of being obeyed, still clung to him like cheap cologne. My mother, Diane, looked haggard, her face a carefully constructed mask of sorrow that didn't quite reach her eyes. Noah and Sophie just looked nervous, their gazes darting around the restaurant, landing everywhere but on me as they slid into the booth opposite. They looked less like a family and more like four strangers summoned to a deposition. As they approached, I stood. Not for a hug, but for a handshake. It was a formal, disarming gesture. I took each of their hands in turn. Jack's was cool and papery, Diane's was trembling, Noah's was slick with sweat, Sophie's was limp. My grip was firm, professional. The handshake of a commanding officer taking control of a meeting. It was a small, deliberate act to establish the new hierarchy. This was my operation, on my terms. From a nearby table, I saw Zoe look up from her book, her eyes missing nothing. My backup was in position. My father began, his voice weak and raspy, a pale imitation of the booming voice I vaguely remembered. "Alina, thank you for coming," he started, his hands trembling slightly on the polished tabletop. I know we made a lot of mistakes." On cue, as if from a script, my mother's eyes welled with tears. Noah and Sophie became intensely fascinated by the breadbasket, as if it held the secrets to the universe. It was a well-rehearsed performance, a theatrical production designed to disarm me with pity and guilt. But the soldier in me, the survivor, felt nothing. I had spent my life observing human behavior to stay safe. I was immune to this kind of emotional theater. I didn't come here to hear apologies, I said. My voice was even and steady, cutting through his performance like a surgeon's scalpel. Apologies are for people who want a relationship. I came here to ensure that we are all operating from the same, fact-based history. The history of the last 24 years. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out the folder labeled Exhibit A, and placed it squarely in the center of the table. The soft thud of the folder hitting the wood echoed in the sudden, tense silence that fell over them. It landed with the finality of a judge's gavel. Page 1, I began, my voice devoid of emotion as I opened the folder. June 14, 1998. I was officially placed into the Illinois foster care system. The intake form, signed by our caseworker, contains a checked box next to the line, "Parents have declined custody." My father flinched as if he'd been physically struck. Diane let out a soft, strangled gasp, a hand flying to her mouth. I turned the page, the crisp sound of the paper slicing through the air. Fast forward 1 year. A log entry from the same caseworker, dated May 20th, 1999. It reads, "A social worker attempted to contact you both 3 times by phone regarding a permanent custody hearing. The log notes, no response received." I continued, my voice a relentless, dispassionate monotone. I was no longer speaking as Alina. I was presenting evidence. I read the highlights from the file, the report from the Jacksons detailing my malnutrition, the nurse's notes from a school visit citing my repeated bouts of insomnia and anxiety, the log of letters that were returned to the DCFS office, stamped undeliverable. Each fact was a bullet point, each sentence a carefully aimed shot. I watched their faces transform in stages, moving from performative sadness to genuine, slack-jawed shock, and then, finally, to a deep, immutable shame. They couldn't argue with the black ink on the white paper. They couldn't refute the official record of their own choices. My mother finally broke. The fake tears became real sobs of panicked self-pity. "But I always loved you, Alina," she cried, reaching a trembling hand across the table. "In my heart, I never, ever stopped loving you." I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I looked her directly in the eye, my gaze as cold and hard as polished steel. "Love is not a feeling, Diane," I said, using her first name to sever the last thread of our old connection. "It is an action. You may have felt something you called love in your heart, but you acted as if I didn't exist. Your actions are the only truth that matters here today." Her hand dropped back to the table as if it had been burned. The table fell utterly silent, the ambient noise of the restaurant fading into a distant hum. My words hung in the air, undeniable and devastating. I had taken their last, best defense, the flimsy shield of sentiment, and dismantled it with surgical precision. I let the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment, allowing the full weight of the truth to crush them. Finally, I closed the folder. The sound was a definitive snap. "This is our history," I stated, my voice ringing with finality. "This is the truth. I survived, not because of any of you, but in spite of you. I will not be a character in your happy family charade. I will not be your deathbed confession to ease your guilt. This meeting is the period at the end of the sentence." I pushed my chair back and stood up. Across the room, seeing my signal, Zoe closed her book and did the same. "From this point forward, you will not contact me, my friends, or my colleagues ever again. This bridge is burned." I looked at each of them one last time, 4 broken figures adrift in the wreckage I had just laid bare. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away. Zoe fell into step beside me as we pushed through the restaurant doors and stepped out into the clean, cold air of a Chicago afternoon, leaving them buried in the ruins of their own lies. The victory didn't feel like a victory. As Zoe and I walked away from the restaurant, the adrenaline that had fueled me drained away. And it didn't leave satisfaction in its place. It just left a hollow ache. The kind a soldier feels after a brutal battle is won, standing in the sudden, deafening silence of the field, surrounded by the cost of the fight. We didn't speak. We walked along the Chicago Riverwalk, the cool autumn wind whipping off the water, carrying away the tension that had clung to me like a shroud. I had expected to feel triumphant, liberated, Instead, I just felt empty. All the energy I had focused for so long on this single objective was now gone, and there was nothing to replace it. Zoe must have sensed it. She stopped and leaned against the railing, looking out at the city lights reflecting on the dark water. "You okay, Captain?" she asked quietly. I shook my head, the words coming out in a raw whisper. "I don't know, Zoe. It feels like I just attended my own family's funeral." And in a way, I had. I had gone there to confront ghosts, and I had ended up burying them for good. That night, back in the quiet of my hotel room, I slept. For the first time in weeks, it was a deep, dreamless sleep. There were no nightmares, no replays of old wounds. There was just a vast, peaceful emptiness, the quiet of a battlefield after the war is finally over. The next morning, before our flight back to Fayetteville, I rented a car. There was one last reconnaissance mission I had to run, alone. I drove west, out of the city, the familiar highways leading me back to the suburban maze of Naperville. I found Elm Street easily. The house was still there, but it was wrong. It was painted a pale, sterile gray instead of the cheerful yellow of my memories. A different family's car was in the driveway, but my eyes were drawn to the backyard. The old, mighty oak tree, the one that had been the silent witness to our family's promise, was gone. In its place was nothing but a flat, circular stump, a scar on the perfectly manicured lawn. The time capsule and the childish drawing of 5 stick figures holding hands was buried forever under someone else's life. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a cold, final confirmation. That world, that family, that little girl, they were truly gone. They didn't exist anymore, except in the half-burned photograph of my memory. I didn't get out of the car. I just sat there for a long moment, the engine idling, and then I put the car in drive and pulled away without looking back. It was a final farewell to a ghost. A few weeks after I returned, a package arrived. It was a small cardboard box with Sophie's handwriting on it. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was Howard, my old teddy bear. His seams had been carefully stitched back together, his button eyes polished. Tucked under his arm was a short, simple note. "I kept him all this time. I'm sorry, Alina." That same day, I received an email from Noah. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was a report. "Dad passed away last week," he wrote. "He read the file you left on the table. He read it over and over. I think, at the end, he finally understood." I didn't reply to either of them. I placed Howard on the armchair in my living room, a silent relic from another life. He was a symbol of everything, of innocence lost, of profound abandonment, and now, of a late, futile attempt at repair. I read Noah's email a dozen times. There was no joy in knowing my father had understood. It was too late. His understanding couldn't give back the years I'd spent alone, couldn't erase the nights I'd cried myself to sleep with hunger pains. Their remorse, I realized, was for them. It was a balm for their own conscience, not a medicine for my wounds. I had been listening to some talks online by a meditation teacher, Jack Cornfield. A line of his had been echoing in my mind. "Forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past." I couldn't change what happened, but I could stop wishing, stop hoping that it had been different. I could accept the past for what it was and release it. That evening, I took the folder, Exhibit A, and the email from Noah out to the burn barrel in my backyard. I added the old letters I'd kept, the ones returned to me all those years ago. I struck a match and dropped it in. I stood and watched as the flames licked at the edges of the paper, curling the reports into black ash. The fire consumed the social worker's detached notes, the medical records, the typed words of my brother. It wasn't an act of anger. It was a ceremony, a release. I was finally letting it all go. I wasn't forgiving them for what they had done. I was forgiving myself for carrying the weight of it for so long. When the last ember faded into the twilight, leaving nothing but a pile of gray ash, I spoke the words out loud to the quiet evening air. "It's over," I said. "Mission complete." I turned and walked back into my house, leaving the wind to scatter the last remnants of my old life. A year passed. A year of quiet healing, of rebuilding not just boundaries, but my own internal landscape. The mission in Chicago had been the final battle of a long war. What followed was the peace. On a brilliant summer afternoon, I found myself back in Illinois. The sky was a vast cloudless blue, a stark contrast to the gray memories this state held for me. But I wasn't here for the past. I was here for the future. Dressed in civilian clothes, I stood before a brand new, cheerful-looking house, complete with a small porch and bright blue shutters. This was Alina's house, a home I had personally funded within an SOS Children's Village, a place for children who, like me, had been left behind by the world. Sarge, Carol, and Zoe had flown in to be with me. When I spoke at the small dedication ceremony, I didn't introduce myself as Captain Winters. "My name is Alina," I said simply. As I watched a group of children chase a soccer ball across the fresh green lawn, I felt a pure, uncomplicated joy that was entirely new to me. It was joy without the shadow of the past. I had returned to the geographic source of my pain, not as a victim seeking closure, but as a guardian offering a beginning. After the ceremony, a small girl with big, curious eyes and a missing front tooth ran up and threw her arms around my legs in a spontaneous hug. I knelt down to her level, my heart aching with a fierce, protective love. I looked into her eyes, seeing a reflection of the little girl I once was, and made her a silent promise. Then I spoke the words I had needed to hear my entire life. "You will never be alone," I whispered. That evening, the scent of charcoal and barbecue sauce filled the backyard of my own home in Fayetteville. The scattered collection of people who had become my true north were all there. Zoe was laughing as she argued with another medic about the best way to grill burgers. Sarge and Carol Miller were sitting on the porch swing, looking every bit the adopted grandparents to my entire circle of friends. And standing next to me at the grill was Michael, a fellow officer I'd met a few months after the trip to Chicago, a quiet, steady man whose presence had become the foundation of my newfound peace. This was my family. As I looked around at the circle of friends, at the easy smiles and genuine laughter, I saw the truth. They were the bricks and mortar of the home I had built inside myself. There were no hidden agendas, no transactional relationships. There was only the unconditional love and fierce loyalty of people who had chosen to stand with me, and for whom I would do the same. This was the real thing. Later, in the quiet of my home office, I often find myself looking at two pictures that hang on the wall. They are the two halves of my whole story. One is a restored photograph of an 8-year-old girl with wide, hopeful eyes. A picture Sophie had sent me, one of the few that had survived. The other is a charcoal portrait Michael had sketched of me. It's Captain Winters, in full dress uniform, her gaze direct, strong, and unwavering. For years, I had tried to kill the little girl in that photo, believing her softness was a liability. And for a time, I thought the captain was all I was. But now, I no longer see them as two separate people at war with each other. I see them as one. The little girl who was abandoned gives me my capacity for empathy. The captain who was forged in fire gives me my strength. Together, they make me whole. I have finally made peace with both of them. The story ends here, on my back porch, on a warm North Carolina evening. Michael and I are sitting in comfortable silence, watching the last sliver of the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. He reaches over and takes my hand, his thumb gently stroking my knuckles. "Do you have any regrets?" he asks quietly, his eyes searching mine. I think for a long moment, replaying the brutal, lonely journey that led me to this exact spot. I think of the pain, the hunger, the cold fury. I think of the woman I had to become to survive it all. I don't regret the person I had to become to get here, I finally say, my voice soft but certain. The journey was brutal, but it led me here. It led me to my family. It led me to you. I squeeze his hand. It led me home. I remembered a quote by Maya Angelou that had resonated with me. "The ache for home lives in all of us, the safe place where we can go as we are and not be questioned." I realized I had finally built that place. I look up as the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. The same stars my father had once pointed out to me, constellations that for years had only reminded me of broken promises. But tonight, they are not ghosts. They are a vast, limitless map, a promise of a future I am entirely in command of, a universe I get to navigate on my own terms. Thank you for walking this journey with me to the very end. My home is finally built, on a foundation of my own choosing. Perhaps you're still laying the foundation for yours, or maybe you're just realizing you have the tools to begin. Remember, the family that matters is the one that stands with you in the trenches, and the only person who can truly build your own peace is you. If this story gave you strength, please support the channel by liking this video and sharing it with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. And be sure to subscribe for more stories about overcoming the past and forging your own path. Thank you for listening. Stay strong.